So to start off the episode, the patch basically lay down like the ground rules of this little competition and a couple of things to take note of. First off, I like how when explaining the different environments these fights take place in, we actually do get an idea of what they look like, whereas the manga just had speech bubbles explaining it, which granted the anime just used still images of these environments and we would have a better idea what these look like once the fighting started, but I like just that extra little touch adds more to the visual presentation of things, like whereas before it's kind of, I mean, I guess you could say that like in the manga it was more meant as kind of like a mystery of just what things would be like for them, but I just like getting a better idea of what kind of environments they're heading into. Of course, when we do finally make it to the first plant, I like how we're shown immediately what makes these environments so threatening, which is that depending on the kind of power the shaman has, they can literally feed off the elemental weaknesses of a shaman's spiritual power, as shown through Rin and Horohoro's like inability to really do anything in the desert, forcing Ryu to step in. Now, moving on from that though, let's talk about Silva, because going off what I said last week, you really do get even more of that sense that despite being supposedly re-educated by the patch, and despite him acting more cruel, there's still that part of him that wants Yo and the others to succeed. Like as we pretty much saw from that small little bit of advice you offer before leaving with the other patch, like little stuff like that shows that despite his personality change, they haven't exactly succeeded in breaking his will completely either. Like Silva himself still has a strong enough will in order to hold on to at least somewhat of his ideals and his principles. Like again, it was that whole thing of where he still has the mentality of trying to teach them a lesson of what they need to do to be stronger. I also like how there is also this like immediate acceptance from everyone, that just from the brief bout with Silva, that they already know they're outclassed, but they still have to push forward and they have to be stronger and whatnot. With that being the case, though, let's talk about Ryu more, because obviously we see the reveal of his new armored oversoul, and even though ultimately he was defeated, you could argue he still kind of won, because despite being talked down to as being weak by Namari and the others, he did still show he's fully capable of fighting alongside them in his own way, and kind of really honestly exposed just how much Ren has been kind of underestimating Ryu. Like it wasn't until this moment in time where he stood up to Namari, where he suddenly acknowledged Ryu as strong. Now, and it showed that yeah, I think in some ways what he was doing was what he did. What we're being shown with Ren just kind of standing over Ryu, and that was his way of kind of acknowledging that, yeah, he's the stronger person, even if strength-wise he's weaker than him. Now, granted, the fight with Ryu, Horohoro, and Ren versus Namari is kind of odd because of how this episode was more or less adapted. And what I mean by that is large chunks of dialogue and conversation were completely cut from the desert fight. And while I'm not going to say it was all entirely necessary, it like a lot of I think of those conversations and what people were saying did add a bit of an emotional build up to the fight, whereas cutting it out kind of makes the fight and Ryu's moments almost feel a little bit like an afterthought in comparison to the manga. And again, I didn't hate I think there's still a little bit of that, in there in the anime's adaptation, but not as much as in the manga. Like you can pretty much tell that the fight in the desert was sort of a sacrifice that they needed to make in order to push forward with the adaptation. But yeah, it's like it was a sacrifice that they kind of ended up making. They kind of sacrificed like Ryu's moment in order to move forward almost. Now, with that said, I do still love how Ren and Horohoro had ultimately combined their powers to defeat Namari. Like, it's a very logical means by which to incorporate the whole idea that individually they didn't have the strength to beat him, but combining the power they had and could make use of is what made defeating Namari possible to begin with. And yeah, beyond that, there's not a whole lot else to talk about. We get a pretty big setup between Manta and his father to finally have the heart-to-heart talk they both really need to have right now, as they can't keep alienating each other at this point. They need to have a conversation. And the rest of the episode is essentially setting up the next round of fights between Yo's group and the Patch, although it is interesting to see how knowledge the characters have of the Patch members who officiated their entry into the Shaman fight can come in handy in fighting against them, like Lyserg is doing with Braun, while still acknowledging that they have been holding back. And let's be real, despite how the episode ended, Braun isn't dead. Braun isn't defeated. Like, it's despite how powerful Lyserg has become, it's going to take a lot more than what he has currently in order to defeat Braun. Like, I think Lyserg did land a sizable blow, but it's not the end of him either. Now, I guess it is worth mentioning, though, as well, that all of Hao's followers are basically perfectly aware of his ascension at this point, and from here it's like just a matter of what happens between now and then, whether the world is destroyed or the world is saved. But regardless, Hao will ultimately become the new Shaman King, Great Spirit, whatever. And I'll get more into this when we get to the final moments of the fight with Hao, but really think about the significance of what this is all leading up to, and what and how this kind of correlates with what Yo said would happen. Like, Yo said, before any of this happened, that Hao is more or less going to win, and it's all kind of leading to that moment. Like, this is a rarity. Like, the interesting thing about this is that this is a kind of a rarity in a shonen manga nowadays, where the story is very willing to have the antagonist win. Like, think about that idea in itself in pertaining to shonen manga. It's if you look at every shonen manga that's come out since Shaman King, in some way or another, the heroes, the protagonists, have won. They've saved the day, but and this is the case for pretty much every shonen that's come after Shaman King. But here, like, Shaman King is very much willing to let the villain win. Like, that's where this direction is pointing, and I gotta say, I kind of appreciate the balls on the series for that. But again, we'll get more into that later. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe. I'm on Twitter and on Crunchyroll. Be sure to hit the notification bell, hit the subscribe button, and just share the video around, guys. Dark Knight of Anime, signing off. Later, everyone.